In this video, I want to tell and show you the complete process of creating a painting. This is a black woman on a yellow background. I painted it in about 40 minutes. I set myself the goal of finishing the painting in half an hour. Very often I set myself such goals in order to cut out the unnecessary during the process. When you set a very short period of time, you won't get distracted by little things that aren't important for the result. Well, not that important. At least at the beginning of the process. As you can see, I start with the silhouette. The silhouette is pretty simple for the girl. I laid it in with a medium semi-transparent brown color, pretty loosely. Now look, I find the darkest one. My process is pretty much like this already. That's how the work always goes. First, I find the whole silhouette with some kind of mid-tone, the main shapes. The brain already begins to grasp locations. Next, I work with contrast. That is, I start with the darkest areas first. I leave the white and the lightest parts for later, because we already have a white canvas, which already gives us the white. As you can see, I'm locating the darkest areas. On the head, I made it almost completely black, and on the face, I added some redness so it wouldn't be just pure black. Here are the proportions of the face. As you know, there are some basic ones like these, and the main proportions like the forehead. For instance, the forehead size is about the same as the distance from the eyebrows to the nose's base, and from there to the chin. Now look, once I've found some basic shapes, I take the lighter tones and find the brightest areas. To be continued, the brightest areas. I often mix yellow, white and red, but depending on the lighting, the brightest areas can also be cool. For example, just white and blue, maybe a little red. Here, you always need to look at your own version, at your own reference. I'm making this portrait from a photo. So I've taken a smaller brush now, and I'm starting to work on it a bit, making the transition softer for different shapes. But it's very important not to take a really tiny brush here. I took a smaller brush, but it's actually not that small. Its size is about 12 maybe. It's angled. An angled brush is quite convenient, often for things like hair, for example. And in general, a flat brush also works well, just like a regular flat brush. It also allows you to add some finer details because it has that angled tip. Look, when I did warm colors like orange and then suddenly took blue, dark blue, it already became cool. It shows shadows in dark areas. In section A, what's interesting here is that very often the rule works that if the light is warm, then the shadows are cool. In this case, I decided that the light is warm and the shadows are cool. I'm saying that I decided because often in the original photo it's not visible. It's almost impossible to see which light or shadow should be cool. The second thing is I often take and try things that I've never tried before. Some sharpness, of course, experiments. Of course, they're not always successful, but a lot of realizations come when you try things you've never done before. Moreover, when you have some resistance or fear to try a certain color, to try it boldly, it means you need to try it because very often there are great opportunities hidden behind that fear. Suninkaya added it. I'm already working on the lips. Here the lips are being shown and the teeth draw quite a lot of attention because the eyes are closed, so basically these are the main features left. These are the lips and teeth, which are the ones we'll have to work on the most. Lips, mark them just a little and also mark the nose a bit. Chin, I often leave it for last for final adjustments. That is, I often add or remove it. Well, so actually here already. Little by little, more precisely, here are different facial wrinkles. Don't be afraid, or rather don't be afraid. But step back from the painting more often, look at it from a distance, the way everyone else sees us from afar. Try not to focus on the details at first, focus on the overall shape. That is, you can even squint, look without focusing, just look. See, I'm already finding some of the teeth here. Gradually start refining, I'm even starting to do it now. Small refinements are necessary during the process in order to see more precisely whether we've found the right shapes and volumes. Regarding the background, I usually leave it alone at first, while there's still an opportunity to work with the main shapes of the portrait, because often the background later cuts off the excess on the silhouette. That is, refinement is being done. You still don't get how much more precise it needs to be. You need to cut out the silhouette. You don't have to work on the background yet, but sometimes the background really affects the lighting of the portrait. If the background is especially dark, then it makes sense to work on it in parallel with the portrait. So we've outlined the silhouette, more or less laid out some shapes, and now we can move on to the background. The corners of the lips often need to be darkened quite a bit so that they appear rounded. Actually, in general, the face is made up almost entirely of rounded shapes. And you need to understand that if the light falls, for example, on the very top part of the nose, then on the sides the light is not as strong, not as intense. Accordingly, it should be darker there. It's the same with the eyes. We have eyeballs hidden under the eyelids, and we need to add light on one side and gradual shading on the other sides. Look, he's already trying some blue on the cheek. In this case, I don't know what will come out in the end, so I'm experimenting with color. I often try out the light. If I don't like it, I remove it, or sometimes I just blur it a little. Look, right now I added some turquoise color. I'm adding some light and cool tones. How many? I've already made several of these colorful portraits. I still make mistakes and experiment. If I dislike something, I remove it and try again. Often you try the same spot several times using different colors in the same place, and gradually you find what resonates. So here you often don't try to apply any specific knowledge, you just experiment and go by your feelings. So you keep the one you like best. For example, I use turquoise to highlight the eyelashes and eyebrows. Only the upper eyelashes lighten, the lower ones remain dark. Now the portrait is gradually taking shape. The painting really transforms when you use different colors with different temperatures, and they're very different from each other. For example, we had warm colors and then I switched to very cool opposite ones. And the painting transforms beautifully. Look, when I added cool colors to the highlights, to the brightest areas, to the lips, the painting just transformed beautifully. It became much more natural somehow, even though it seems like I originally had warm light, right? And cool shadows. If I had strictly followed that rule, I wouldn't have tried using a cool color on the brightest areas. So I decided to give it a try here, and as a result I actually liked it a lot. At this point the image has basically taken shape. I'm already starting to refine the details. So it took me about 20 minutes in real time, and the video itself is sped up a bit more than twice. So here we are now, and look, I'm even starting to use yellow. Very often I go by the idea that, for example, I've picked some colors, right? And I try out colors I haven't used before, different ones. For example, I tried yellow on the laptop but didn't like it, so I chose red instead. And so basically I keep going like that until I find what I'm looking for. And often in the process, I don't even know what I'm looking for. I just want to make it look nice, and accordingly I try different options. Now I've already reached the neck. Look, I made the brush smaller, right here on the neck. I could have used the bigger brush too. Well, since I had this brush in my hand, I just kept working with it for now. The size of this brush is about a 5. That's what I think. Look, the most important thing here for creating volume is still the tonal values. That means your lightest and darkest parts should match in terms of tonal values. And the hardest part is finding the midtones. That is, the midtone is somewhere between the light and the shadow. If you don't have it, if it doesn't match the tone, meaning it's lighter or darker, then the form will already be distorted or it will look unnatural. Very often I've had this happen. For example, I create some kind of shape, but it doesn't look natural or realistic to me. And as soon as I pick the right tone, that is, without changing the shapes in terms of size, as soon as I find exactly the color, exactly the tone that's needed, that shape immediately becomes very realistic and lifelike. So for each shape, like now for example, I took the chin, added a little shadow, made it a bit orange, and right away the chin looks more rounded. Ideally you should work through each shape this way. Of course, when you're working in this fast mode, it's easy to miss or overlook a lot of things. But that's what it's for. I often use it as a second session. So for example, here this painting took me 40 minutes, and then I always take a fresh look at it in about an hour. Maybe you shouldn't leave it for too long either, because you'll lose the mood you had when you were painting it. And then you'll either want to redo everything or something else. You might ruin that first impression you had. That's why after an hour or even 15 minutes you can have tea, return and fix some details. Very often I take photos, upload them to my tablet and put the original picture and the photo work side by side. I look at which parts, for example, the original loses out. Look, he's starting to work on the background. He mixed it. The color is a complex pistachio. By the way, so at first I mixed it like this, and now I'll make it like this again. And then I realized that it was missing some brightness and juiciness. Before the painting, I will already be changing the color. You'll see everything right now. Subtitles. Don't be afraid to go over the portrait itself when you're doing the background, because you can always move everything back where it needs to be with your finger later. And on the contrary, even if the edges are a bit blurred, it will look great. Naturally, we always have different spaces and objects in space, and their edges are always a bit blurred. It can't be super sharp and clear. Maybe it has to do with our vision, that it always or often blurs the edges a little bit. Or maybe it's just that the object and its surroundings are always connected to each other, right? And you could say at their borders they mix with each other. Here again I use the same angled brush to cover everything completely. At first I actually liked this background, but then I wanted more brightness. Now I'm going to look for it. Right here, just a bit on the cheekbones. Well, here it is, basically a classic underpainting that I did in half an hour. Everything is covered and in color. Well, actually no, this isn't a classic underpainting, it's already quite detailed, it works. A classic underpainting is typically done more roughly. Fingers often work really well. Here, when everything is covered in color, you can move the background toward the portrait, or the portrait toward the background. In other words, you can move things around. And now, look, I've mixed the yellow color and realized that I need to make it a bit brighter. As soon as I started doing it, I immediately felt that it actually looks really great. And you see, right on the wet paint from before, I started adding this yellow, and it's really good. when all the wet paint is blended with transitions. Here I even worked a little with my right hand, look. Now it's already showing the look of the finished painting that accordingly turned out. Quickly made paintings have a certain charm. They easily capture the mood and are simple to interpret, because you have a certain energy at that moment and you pour it all in without holding anything back. You focus as much as you can because you have to. If I have a task due in 30 or 40 minutes, I push myself as much as I can. And concentrating as much as possible. At that moment, when we concentrate as much as possible, our energy flows very directly, like this. Like a river flowing to one place, here the painting. And it often turns out really well. Basically, I have a lot of paintings like that. And this painting as well, it sold pretty quickly. It barely had time to dry before it was sold. And it always surprises me that when I make a painting like that, why don't I make them? I could make them daily. In reality, I'm working toward that goal. So that, I don't know, I could get up in the morning and just paint a picture. Then you move on to other tasks, doing quick work as often as possible. I'm already painting the teeth a bit with a thin brush, see? Be sure to darken it from the side. Now look at the teeth, look, they look like they're in one row. I darkened the gums on the sides. Now I'm going to darken the teeth a little bit. At the very least, you definitely need to darken them. Yeah, look, it's starting just a little bit. So you have to understand that our teeth aren't in a single row, that's how they're positioned. The jaw is rounded, so darken the sides. Now I'm darkening everything slightly. So basically this video is all in one piece. I recorded it in one go. And maybe I tweaked a few small things here and there later, but overall everything is pretty much ready here. I hope this video was helpful for you. Actually, I have a lot of these videos collected, I just never got around to voicing them. Actually, this painting is very good for learning. It's pretty simple, there are no eyes here. And you can get results pretty quickly. Plus the subject itself is quite bright and positive. You can easily give such a painting as a gift or hang it up at home. Well, that's basically it, I'm wrapping up. Good luck to you and creative success. Experiment more.